Okay, so good morning, welcome, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tracy Reinhold. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Everbridge. And today we're going to talk about resilience, obviously very timely based on what came out of South Africa last Friday. So I think that this is a good event to talk about. I'm very fortunate today to have three guests with me, and I will ask each of them to introduce themselves. So Julia, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone who is listening. My name is Julia Finke, and I'm greeting all of you from Hanover in Germany. As for my role, I'm the Regional Security Officer for Asia Pacific and the Middle East at Volkswagen AG here in Germany, covering 19 countries and almost 100 business units. When it comes to my professional background, I would like to refer to it as a very traditional one because I served in the state police here for 17 years before I then jumped into the corporate world in 2015, having led two security organizations in the retail industry, and then joining Volkswagen AG in 2019. And, in order to remain faithful to the topic of security, I underpinned my operational experience also academically, holding a master's degree in criminology. And having said that, I'm very much looking forward to the panel here and fruitful discussions with my lovely co-speakers here.
Great, thanks, Julia. Appreciate it. Scott?
Yeah, good day, everyone. First, Tracy, thank you for inviting me to be here. My name is Scott Welchel. I'm the Chief Security Officer and Global Director of Emergency Services and Security for Dow. Our team leads crisis management for the company globally. And we have emergency services and security functions that span across about 30 plus different countries. So my background is military. I spent some time in the U.S. intelligence community here in the U.S., transitioned to emergency management and did emergency management at the local government level. And then I joined Dow, and I've had roles at our facility level and also globally looking at security compliance and executive protection. So pleased to be here today. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Scott. I really appreciate that. So while we can't see Lana, I do want to introduce her and have her introduce herself. And hopefully we will get some video feed eventually. But Lana, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Absolutely. Can you just confirm if you can hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you perfect.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This is very unfortunate, but I guess this is the times we are living. We have to be very agile and resilient to whatever comes along. So my name is Lana Jurkin-Koenig, and I am head of group security and operational resilience for Swiss Re, which is one of the largest reinsurers in the world. I have recently joined the company, so I am already 90 days in the company, not even the 100 exploratory, you might say. Very rookie, very new one. Before that, I was almost 4 years working for Ernst & Young or EY as a regional director for security risk management internally, not client-facing. I was responsible for managing security risk in the physical world for one of the largest regions in EY globally. And before that, I was working for Deutsche Post DHL Group, which is one of the largest logistic companies in the world. I was there running and coordinating Global Security Situation Center, which is a strategic intelligence hub for 5.5 years. And before that, as Julia said as well, I have a very traditional background coming from military intelligence, where I have been doing many things regarding counterintelligence, counter-organized crime, counter-terrorism, counter-radicalism and extremism topics and so forth. As well as Julia, she's too modest to mention this. We were both deployed to Afghanistan. There I was the deputy NIST commander and collected some first hands-on NATO experience as well. So almost 20 years doing whether international security, national security, or corporate security work, more or less.
Well, it's interesting that we all share a very similar background, and I think that that's sort of been the traditional path to our roles in the past. I think that's changing a little bit as we continue to evolve as an industry. Like the rest of you, I also spent time in the military. and then spent 22 years in the FBI. So transition to the private sector. And my role at Everbridge is a little bit different. I have both physical and digital security. So the CSO and the information security team reports up to me. I also have global compliance. So let's talk a little bit about the reemergence or the emergence of the latest variant and how we adjust to that from a resilience perspective. And I think maybe, Julia, we'll start with you. With Volkswagen has such a large presence globally. How has this impacted, or from your team's perspective, what are the challenges that you faced throughout the pandemic, as well as getting pulled back once again with the latest variant that's manifested out of South Africa?
Well, I would like to give you like a very up-to-date example at Volkswagen AG, because as each and every country now on the planet, Germany is also in the middle of the fourth wave of COVID-19, and we have the highest new infection numbers per day since the pandemic kicked in. I think last week it was up to 70,000 new infections per day. And with that and the new variant comes new governmental requirements, which we as Volkswagen had to implement within a very short period of time. So since last Wednesday, we had to implement the so-called 3G system, meaning that only people that are fully vaccinated, recovered, or tested each and every day can enter our plants here in Germany or offices. And that is not only a very huge organizational, administrative, and technological effort, it comes without saying that, the new requirements are not welcomed by each and every one of our employees. So what does this mean? What we are facing now are demonstrations against the new requirements, not only on a governmental level, but also within Volkswagen, because obviously the non-vaccinated people are getting mad about having their tests done each and every day on their own expenses. We have threats in terms of sabotage. We have people that call in sick on a daily basis, but that goes through to the provision of falsified vaccination certificates and test certificates, which we have each and every day, putting our employees that are working in the plant, and that's 60,000, excluding visitors and suppliers, at a huge risk. And this is something we are really dealing with at the moment. On top of that, we have the travel security component, because now that the new variants are kicking in, it's all the more a matter of duty of care. And since we have started or restarted business travel again, we really need to make sure that our employees who are traveling are safe and sound. And I myself traveled a couple of weeks ago to the Middle East, Qatar and Pakistan, and what you don't want to risk is that your employees end up in governmental quarantine in Pakistan, for example. And this is no judgment, but you need to really make sure that you take good care about it, and you need to be anticipative when you send people on business travel. And you cannot only do that by having your boots on the ground. I think it's very important that you use intelligence-based or born data and metrics that provide you with a bigger picture and bigger scope in order to make sure that you are ahead of whatever is popping up on the horizon.
So I think good points there about leveraging technology to help inform you from a traveler perspective, but also from emerging threat perspective. When you look at the potential for demonstrations or protests at your work sites and how you actually position yourself. Scott, I'm curious from a U.S. perspective, with the president's new mandate about requiring vaccinations or testing for any company with over 100 employees. How has Dow addressed this issue as they continue to work in this hybrid work environment?
Yeah, Tracy, it's a great point. And early on, Dow paid attention to forthcoming rule out of OSHA, even as it was working its way through the process and the language hadn't been developed yet. We started to position ourselves accordingly. as a chemical manufacturing company primarily, but a material science company, we are very attuned to OSHA rules, right? So we immediately started to position ourselves for compliance with what we heard would be coming out of Washington, D.C., but we also engaged. We had very high level of engagement behind the scenes, as other companies did as well, to discuss and to help to shape what ended up coming out, so that they understood the voice of business and what those limitations could do and what business impacts we could have. So the first step was engagement, and now we position ourselves in a way that we are ready to comply. We're already pushing communications out to U.S.-based employees in advance of the rule, even as it's working its way through the court system. We've established our stance for the need to either be testing or to be vaccinated, and we have a requirement by December for everyone to have uploaded into a web-based system what their vaccination status is. So I think, very similar to other companies, but the intelligence function is a centerpiece of that. So there's a policy piece of it, but our intel team stays very well connected on things like this, right? Pointing out to regional crisis management teams, whether it's a potential virus variant that seems to be on the horizon, or a policy change, or any of those other impactful conditions that can change the way that we're doing business.
It's interesting. I want to come back to that in just a second, but Lana, the financial services industry is a highly regulated industry, and I'm wondering, from a physical security perspective, what's been the impact of the manifestation of this latest mutation or variant in your workforce?
Tracy, I have to say, although it's a financial industry, it's very regulated, regulations do not come so quickly. So anything that has been out there regarding COVID since the beginning of COVID is still there, and the mutation actually started popping up on Friday, I think. So it's just a couple of days away. And by the way, FYI, for the reader, for the listeners, and for you as well, the founder of the BioNTech company, which is the Pfizer and BioNTech producer of the vaccine, has just 5 minutes ago made a statement that they do not anticipate that vaccinated people will be having any impact from the mutation. So I guess that it might be a little bit of probably, let's say, overreaction, in a sense that everything stopped. So the impact on Swiss Re is minimal. When it comes to the mutation, it does impact the travel. And I can say also from a personal experience, on Friday morning or Friday afternoon Europe time, Friday morning USA time, I had to stop my team member from coming from New York to Zurich, where we were supposed to meet today, and we're sitting today in Zurich office. He wasn't too happy. I wasn't too happy as well, because we really wanted to meet with the rest of the team. But it was a really kind reminder that you have to stay very agile and very dynamic in this changing environment. I think everybody went into a, let's say, sleepy mode, living with the pandemic. The travel continued, and all of a sudden it was a wake-up call. This can happen as well, and it can be very, very disruptive. So from a financial industry perspective, I would say still no regulation regarding the mutation. I don't think that they would come. From a physical security perspective, obviously the typical, as Julia and Scott also mentioned, the crisis team activation, thinking about closing the office down to the low occupancy mode or emergency mode if this continues, and then obviously accounting for travelers that are somewhere out there, Israel, Japan, Morocco, or South Africa. How do you help them? How do you discharge duty of care as a company, and as well, how do you behave, the best to those human beings that went on business travel, doing their business, and now might have problems to come home, or are even infected with a mutation. So from that perspective, I would say it was a kind reminder to all the corporations out there how flexible and agile we have to be, and how much we have to rethink whether travel in the biggest volume is actually a sensible thing to be done right now.
So I think it's interesting that, and you bring up a really relevant point, and that is being agile. And part of that ability to be agile is to be able to aggregate and deconflict intelligence so that you have information that is actually timely, but is also relevant to you. So when we think about resilience and we think about our ability to pivot, based on, so yeah, last week was the latest mutation or variant. You know, there's been over 30 mutations of this virus since its inception in December of 19. This is not anything new, but I think that the world is so, I guess, jaundiced towards this virus that there was maybe a bit of an overreaction. Let's hope that's what it was. Regardless of whether that's true or not, we as professionals in the security and resilience space have to be able to adjust to the reality that our leadership is facing today. So Julia, you brought up a really good point about, you know, you don't want to get quarantined in a foreign country. We just had a person here in the US that returned from 2.5 years in Australia because they hadn't opened the borders. What was supposed to be a 2-week vacation turned into a 2.5-year odyssey for her. So I'd be curious to see how you leverage technology in maintaining a resilient posture, whether it's, you know, a great intel feed or using tools to track potential COVID spread within your organizations. So maybe Julia, does Volkswagen have the ability to do contact tracing for employees? And if so, how do you guys do that, or is that not allowed in Germany?
Well, it is allowed in Germany, but it's not a must. Like, it's not mandatory to do that. We have certain apps which are not state of the art here in Germany. To be very frank, in terms of Volkswagen, we have a contact tracing process, if you want to call it like that. That's not done via an application, but you know, we have technology now, especially implemented with the implementation of 3G system. So each and every employee that enters the plant needs to register, and all the data, including certificates, be that testing or vaccination certificates, are implemented in our IT infrastructure. So that is what we do. And as soon as we have a positive case, there's a certain process behind it that is very strong in my point of view, but I think there is still room for improvement when it comes to the use of technology in terms of contact tracing.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Scott, one of the things that I've noticed lately is there's been a proliferation of new apps that are being used, like for global travel. Right, you put your vaccination card into the system, and then you have to. So, for example, if I'm traveling to the UK from the US, on day 2 I have to get a test, and on day 8 I have to get a test, etc. And I have to get tested again before I get back on the airplane. How is the company handling that? Even though we have restricted travel, I would assume there are still people traveling for the organization. So how does Dow, first of all, communicate that to their employees? And then what sort of a process do they allow? Do they allow that to the company bear that expense? What happens if somebody tests positive? How do you track that person to maintain the integrity of the rest of your workforce?
Yeah, Tracy, I mean, look, a lot to unpack there. Let me start by saying that we had a pandemic plan and pandemic standard in Dow that pre-existed COVID, right? Going all the way back, it had a huge uplift in modification in 2011. But to borrow a phrase from Eisenhower, and I'll paraphrase, I don't find planes very useful, but I find planning indispensable. And so it was bringing these teams together around planning that resulted in my answer to your question, right? So the plan never said we were going to establish a pandemic technology exchange group. So that wasn't written in the plan. But that's exactly what we ended up doing, was standing up what we called the pandemic technology exchange. And the reason why we did that, there was recognition that there were a number of different players in Dow, whether you're coming from security or IT or health, occupational health, that wanted to leverage technology for things like you already brought up, travel security, contact tracing, site entry controls, right? And what I think we find is that our security teams find themselves at the nexus of all of those different applications. We ended up formulating that pandemic technology exchange so that we can, in one place, capture these requirements. And we don't leave anyone out, right? That way you have legal, you can look at data privacy regulations. You have occupational health because they are the center of gravity when you look at health risk. You have your security teams and your IT enablers. So that's how we've gone about it, is to really create a cross-functional technology exchange platform where we can consolidate requirements across these different areas. That way we're not stepping on top of each other, or we're not fragmented in our approach.
You know, Lana, Scott brings up a good point, and that is the expanded role of the security teams that have been created during this pandemic. And I know you and I have talked before about this, but I think that it's worth revisiting when we think about resilience. One of the things that I think is critical is the ability of a security team to assume new responsibilities, because the organization looks to us as crisis management leaders to be that voice of reason during a time of panic. So whether in this role or in your previous role, I know that you have actually assumed or had assumed a lot of the responsibility for coordinating from not so much a medical, but an overall perspective of how the system would work within the organization, which is not traditionally a security function. So maybe can you share a little bit about how our roles have changed in the last 18 months based on the manifestation of the pandemic?
Thanks, Tracy, for this answer. And yeah, we've been discussing a lot about this, but in reality, 1st of September, when I came to Swiss Re, I changed from one regulated industry to another regulated industry, and I have gotten myself into a position where I will become responsible not only for security and safety for the global organization, but also for operational resilience. And operational resilience is a lot to a lot of people, I would say. So it does come across as a term that can be interpreted differently. First of all, I need to understand what is the difference between business resilience, enterprise resilience, organizational resilience, and operational resilience. What exactly do we mean here? So I reached out to a couple of people, you were one of them as well, but one of them was also a person who has been leading security and operational resilience for a couple of major banks, to explain to me that this is really a financial industry standard. And when I asked him, well, typically it wouldn't really be sitting with security, and whether merging security and operational resilience makes sense, would we be a trendsetters? Is this the way to go for security after COVID, or is this something very typical for financial industry? And he explained that in a bank where he was working, the operational resilience was not taken over by physical security, and you will not like this, simply because the people couldn't really follow. And here we go. The security manager needs to evolve to be able to follow very complex process-based exercise of operational resilience. And after COVID, everybody from our corporate security profession that has appetite to scale up capabilities and learn themselves into this area has a huge potential to bring added value to the company, because operational resilience is a financial industry standard, but actually it is a BCM on steroids that's looking from another side, which is not internal side, but the customer or client or market side. That makes sense. And it merged together not only physical security risk, business continuity, but also third-party vendors, sourcing, outsourcing, cyber risk, IT risk, operational risk, legal compliance. Should I continue? It's very, very complex. However, it's the only thing that makes sense, because what begins on the left side as a security-related incident whether coming from a terrorist attack, a hurricane, and so on and so forth, will then scale up into emergency or crisis, into a disruption of business managed through BCM, or at the end of the day, disruption to operations. And you will not be able to deliver the services, or you will disrupt the whole market, and so forth. So I think it is the way to go. And I'm really happy to be given the opportunity to learn myself into this as well.
So great. Go ahead, Julia.
Now, if I just may add one thing, and I think it was really important and equally true what Lana said before, because everyone is talking about resilience now, at the latest since the pandemic. But I think we need to be really careful not to misuse the word resilience as a fashion word, because it sounds more fancy than security or crisis management or BCM. And when we look at the current pandemic, I think that we are still lagging behind. It's not that we are resilient enough now to encounter the latest developments coming along with the pandemic. And this is not only true for the pandemic. I mean, we've seen global supply chains turned upside down as soon as the pandemic kicked in. And when we speak about resilience and business intelligence and new business models, we need to try to think ahead and really have realistic, critical, and honest discussions. And how do we get back on track or ahead of incidents? And if we want to stick to the example of supply chains, why not use business intelligence before something happens, in terms of screening all the suppliers along the supply chain against certain framework parameters to then mitigate default probability in terms of credit default or capacity default? You can prevent that. You cannot prevent the pandemic, but you can prevent certain framework parameters that might then become even more hindering in operational business.
So it's interesting. So what I'm hearing here, and I hate to sound like a consultant, but what I'm hearing here is there's been a real transformation. And part of that is understanding the core business. So security and resilience is designed to enable a business to be successful. So traditionally, from a security perspective, we were always the department of no, right? No, you can't do this. No, you can't travel there, etc. And what we've transitioned to is to be a business enabler. So when you talk about resilience, whether it's business resilience, personal resilience, or enterprise resilience, what we're talking about is the ability to recover from a disruption and return to revenue faster. One of the ways, and Julia, you did a great job of talking about this, one of the ways to do that is to get ahead of that threat by using proactive intelligence to actually inform us about potential business disruptions, and then putting together mitigation plans that allow us to do that. And Scott, I thought you did a really good job about, and we're talking about, it's not enough to just do it in theory, you have to exercise these muscles, right? Because we play like we practice. If we don't exercise, then we're unfamiliar with it. What you don't want to do is to have the first time you open up your potential planning folder or laptop is the day of the crisis. At that point, it's too late. So I'm curious from an organizational perspective, Scott, how does Dow face exercising that muscle about resilience? And more importantly, how do you engage your C-suite and your board to understand that? And the reason I say that is, Julia mentioned, this new, not new, but the new way we talk about resilience. My fear is that as the pandemic wanes and we return back to normal, resilience once again goes onto the back burner, and we maximize revenue over at the cost of risk and resilience. So, we have just-in-time delivery, which really sort of became a big thing maybe 10, 15 years ago, which is fine. But what it also shows is that we didn't anticipate these types of disruptions. So from an exercise culture, Scott, how do you, in your role, make sure that your leadership, your senior leadership, gets engaged in these exercises, because it's really important that that happens? Oh, can't hear you.
sorry. If I could go back in time, we did a corporate tabletop exercise in 2019. The scenario, though, was based on the Maersk, not Petya, scenario of a massive and crippling cyber event. I wish I had selected our pandemic plan to be exercised in 2019, but I think that's the essence, right? Is that our CEO and our executive leadership have an expectation that at the very top of the house, we're going to do an exercise like that. And this was pretty massive. I mean, we had over 25 of our CEO's direct report level leaders in one room, and we had them broken up into different tables. And we had facilitators. We had a pretty robust scenario that we put in front of them, and they allocated 3 hours, consecutive hours, to that program. So I think you've got to have leadership commitment at the top to make sure that you will do that. But you've got to cascade that throughout the organization. And I would say that we're probably better at doing this at the lower levels, where the rubber meets the road for us in our manufacturing sites and whatnot, because they exist in that world a little bit more. And when you get away from your shop floor or your ground level, it becomes more critical to get those different capabilities, those different functions to the table with scenario-based planning and discussion-based exercises, so that you're tying the top to the bottom. You know, for us, you know, we often say, and I think it's important to point out, that everyone seems to be very threat focused, right? To my point before, we were cyber focused, so we had a cyber exercise. Now people are probably having pandemic exercises, right? Well, what's next, right? I mean, are we going to have to start writing our asteroid abatement plan? Because we're very threat focused instead of building capability, right? And I think that's where the real heart of this is to build capability. And what the capability building does for you is it helps you to fight fragmentation. You know, we're fond of saying that fragmentation is the silent killer of risk management programs, because failures tend to happen at the seams, where you see people, policies, and processes either diverging or having a gap. And an exercise environment helps you to discover those gaps and fill them with the right capabilities and options. And if you can align your intelligence-led functions to business objectives to fill those gaps, that's where the magic can happen.
You know, it's an interesting point, and I just want to capture something you said about capability building. So the way I look at that is to be threat and risk agnostic, right? So as you develop those capabilities, think about how you open that aperture. And instead of being myopically focused on today's threat, you know, humankind historically has always fought the last war, right? So if we do that again in the resilience space, we're not actually helping our organizations. And part of our ability to do that is to be an influencer, which means that we have to be able to speak the core language of the business. We can't always speak security because that doesn't necessarily resonate with the core business. So it's how we communicate the message to enable the business to be successful and to recover. You know, Lana, I'm curious from a technology perspective. So let's talk first a little bit about how you influence business leaders from a security and resilience space without terrifying them. And secondly, how does technology help you build capabilities that can be used in multiple issues?
I'm so glad you asked this, because let me start with an anecdote. So in September, when I started working for Swiss Re, which is obviously a Swiss-based company, I was in Zurich, walking on the street. By the way, it's a beautiful city, and I was searching for a present for my 7-year-old son, and it's a boy. And and then I found a Swiss Army knife. I don't know whether you know what Swiss Army knife is.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought that would be a really cool present, but probably it's not really, let's say, kids friendly, right? So I cannot really bring a Swiss Army knife back to a 7-year-old child. But I went to the store, and they said that actually they have a kids-friendly knives, right? They are not sharp. And when I open it, and I bought it for him, I have to say. And when you open the Swiss Army knife, you would see inside a knife, scissors, clippers, a bottle opener, a can opener. So everything that you need to survive in the woods. And I thought it was a really cool present. But I also thought, and when I saw in one of the reports from one of the Big Four that they were really spot on, they said operational resilience is your Swiss Army knife for your next crisis. And I thought, wow, this is really spot on. And this is the answer to your question. How does technology enable resilience and helps with resilience? Actually, technology is a Swiss Army knife. And what we do with it is we plug the programs inside. So you might have a, real-time and strategic intelligence as a knife. You might have a business continuity management part of the technology supporting your resilience as a clipper. You might have emergency notification ability of that Swiss Army knife as one of the module, and so on and so forth. You could have the trainings and preparedness and response through your technology that enables resilience. I don't know how we would be able to build resilience capabilities without technology these days. And the good thing about building a program like that with help of technology is that you can bring all those APIs, data points, internally, externally, into one platform, and then do a really cool thing that you were mentioning here as well, wrap intelligence all around the whole program. And then you get resilience. I don't know if you know this word. I also stumbled upon this with my team member when we were researching. It's a predictive resilience. Actually, you can predict a lot of things. And we've seen this when Facebook and WhatsApp had an outage. That's something that actually, once your technology picks this up, you can actually go and ask in the company, which is something that my colleagues did as well. How does this actually impact us? And do we need to prevent this situation? It was part of it was access control in Facebook as well. So how do you learn from what's happening in outside world and prevent that kind of incident happening within your premises or within your organization as well? So I hope this answers the question, how does technology support resilience? I think your second question was, how do you stop speaking the language of security and convince the leadership? And I think resilience, again, is here very helpful. But what Julia said is what we really need to take care that we don't oversell ourselves. First of all, the one thing that I was really convinced in doing is changing the narrative of security. So instead of saying we are here to protect this and that, I said, how about this? Let us put ourselves in the center of the mission of this company. How about if we are not protecting people and assets on the premises, how about if we are protecting the long-term values, the data, and the human capital? That sounds directly much, much better and much, much more strategic, right? And obviously having resilience in our name and having responsibility for operational resilience helps really much, because Swiss Re's mission is to make the world more resilient, whereas what we are doing is making Swiss Re more resilient. So you cannot be more, let's say, closer to the company mission than we are for the time being.
So a couple of thoughts. First of all, I'm going to steal the Swiss Army knife analogy for technology because I love that. Right. So
by the way, it's not mine. It's not mine. I have to say this was coming from reading a report on operational resilience from one of the providers. I'm going to send it to you. But yeah, please go ahead.
I'm going to use it. I see a lot of nodding heads here, so I think it'll be used elsewhere as well. I think you bring up a really important point, and that is internally in our security and resilience team is educating our team members about the value they bring to a company. Not so much from a security perspective, but from a business enablement perspective. And I like the way that you talk about adding long-term value or protecting the long-term value of an organization, because I think that is the future of security and resilience. So Julia, I'm curious from your perspective, every company has a unique culture, and culture is an important part of any organization. Nobody brings a security professional in to change the culture. They bring us in to help protect that culture or to enable that culture. So from your perspective, how do you do that as a leader while ensuring that the message of resilience is actually heard by the line employees as well as our executives?
I mean, that's a very, very valid point, Tracy. And I wanted also to come back to what Lana said before, because, you know, when we want to speak about industry 4.0, education 4.0, work 4.0, we also need to speak about security 4.0. And security 4.0 without technology is not possible. But, and now speaking about culture and human capital, you need also people in your team, in your security organization, that have the competence to deal with those technologies. I mean, you can deal with suppliers and consultants and just buy the service. But obviously, if you want to be set up for future threats and the security landscape that is awaiting us in the future, you need the human capital that is able to deal with technologies and to, you know, handle those kind of threats by using the technology. And I think we are lagging behind in terms of having teams that are not composed necessarily of people that have this technology competence. You know, all of us having the very traditional background, we don't necessarily come up with a technology competence which, you know, is initially in our DNA. So for us, it's very important that we, when it comes to recruiting, we look for people that bring in these technology competence, because otherwise you will not be fit for the future. And I think with that, with recruiting new and innovative human capital, you will change the culture very easily. I mean, it's not easy to change a company culture or a security organization culture in general, but I think if you change the team's dynamic and the competences of the team, then automatically there will be a different culture and strategy coming up on the horizon with that.
So I don't disagree. I think you're spot on. I'll give you an example. So I'm the CSO at Everbridge. When I started my professional life with the FBI, there was no such thing as a cell phone. Yes, I'm that old. So as we look at new hires, Scott, I'm curious from your perspective, you know, as we build out what the future of security and resilience looks like, you know, what skill sets are we looking for? Are we looking for people skills? Are we looking for technology skills? We can train the security skill, but we can't train the other things. I'm curious from your perspective, as you look at new hires and as you look at the evolution of the security and resilience professionals, you know, what are you looking for? Because I know schools are now offering degrees in corporate security, which is a total game changer for us. And the challenge is leveraging technology and bringing in skills that are not traditional in the security space. What are you looking for?
Yeah, well, first I'll point out that we have a very focused effort on diversity and inclusion. And obviously that takes on what we are all working on in terms of our diversity and inclusion hiring. But I'll take that a step further and say the diversity extends to diversity of thought and background, right? So I see that we're getting great value in bringing in from within the company, from other functions into our security world, people from our environmental health and safety function, people from our public and government affairs function. So we're opening the door to get first from within, people coming in and out of our emergency services and security functions from other Dow functions. So that's really been a game changer for us. I think we've really stepped up our game in doing that with great effect. In terms of hiring externally and some of those attributes that we're looking for, I think we've really touched on a lot of them. If I've got to sort of pick something that illustrates or embodies the type of team member we're looking for, it was written about in Stan McChrystal's book, Team of Teams. And in that book, he describes an organization that's extremely agile, that has aligned objectives, where accountability and responsibility is at all levels of the organization. And to be a little biased here, it seems to describe people with our common background, whether you're coming from military, law enforcement, the intelligence community, where whenever you look around, if you see people that are wearing the same uniform as you, or they're wearing the same functional identity as you, you automatically feel uncomfortable because you know you need others to be there for you to accomplish the mission, right? And if I'm going to borrow my Army analogy, I can't just have artillery. I can't just have infantry. I can't just have an Air Force, right? We need all of these different capabilities aligned to common objectives to be successful. And as long as people are bringing that mindset in, we can do exactly what you're describing, Tracy, is give them the rest of the tools, the rest of the skill sets, and bring them down a path of mastery of their craft and get them where they need to be on their skills. But they need to first come in with this collaborator-in-chief mentality.
So I think good points. I wanted to be cognizant of time, and before I forget, which this happens to me all the time, I did want to thank all of you for participating today, because what I like about these sessions, and this one in particular, is the diversity of thought that's brought to the table. And so Lana and Julie and I have spoken before in the past, and Scott, obviously with your Best in Enterprise Resilience certification, you understand the criticality of resilience. So in the time that we have left, what I'd like to do is to pose to each of you, if you were to give your parting shots to the audience about what is important and how you actually enable a business to be successful from your chair, how would you do that? So Lana, I want to start with you. I've probably known you the longest, and I'm just very impressed with your capabilities. So if you wouldn't mind starting us off, there's no pressure, but if you can start us off with your thoughts of what the future looks like and how our industry can help to shape and enable organizations to be successful.
Oh, Trace, you can't see me blushing. It's really pity that nobody can see me because I'm all dressed up. But no, next time. Look, the future lies in technology, as Julia said as well, in the human capital, in making our companies resilient, in merging from left and right, not in one organization necessarily, but rather acting as a coordinator, center of expertise, center of excellence, however you want to call yourself. This is where we are really good, in coordinating, in taking the leadership, in bringing the parties together at one table, and then speaking the language of the business and strategic language. I have to say that I feel very, very privileged and very lucky to work in the converged security organization, and this helps. This helps not only because Swiss Re is heavily impacted by digital transformation, as every company in insurance and reinsurance and beyond, health sector and so on and so forth, and it's changing. Swiss Re is changing. It's changing to tech and data enabled risk company. And if you think that our premises are changing to technology and data protection, then you know that security lies in the center of it. And you, as a physical security or corporate security, or however we are allowed these days to call ourselves, have a lot of stake in that, and you can learn so much. So I do really feel that I am privileged to be part of the holistic defense posture of the organization, that I can learn as a security expert around cybercrime, information security, and get really exposure to the technology part of the story as well, and to be put in the center, not only from a corporate security side, but also from a resilience side. I think this is really important. This is where I feel that I'm very privileged because I know this is not to be taken for granted. There are a lot of silos approaches and a lot of organizations that are far away from converging. And Tracy, I congratulate you on your digital security hat as well. But yeah, for very big organizations, this is a challenge and maybe a missed opportunity as well, I might say.
Great. So Julia, a little bit of a different question for you because I lied before. We all don't get the same question. I'm curious from your perspective because you are a bit of a groundbreaker in corporate security. And I'm curious from your perspective what you would tell somebody who is interested in getting into this line of work today, somebody new to the corporate security and resilience. What are you looking for? What should they expect?
Well, I think that, over the last few years, we very much evolved from the people that were kind of celebrating the dark art of security behind the curtain. And we kind of try to get rid of this siloed mentality. So I think we are on a good way to be perceived as not only a gatekeeper or firefighter, but as we mentioned many times, the business enabler. And I think since we moved away from the classical or traditional, very conservative gatekeeper, there is so much potential in this role as a security professional, perceiving security from different angles. And Scott, you said that before, we don't have only the traditional security people, we have people coming from risk management, coming from psychology, coming from religious educations whatsoever. And I think that this community, the security community, offers a great playground for people from all the disciplines that are able to really provide input and great value to enhance the capabilities of security. And if you ask me, and probably also Lana, we still are lacking a few females on the security board. So if I would like to, I just would like to invite also the females out there, just have a chat with the available security managers all around the globe. Ask their questions and, come around or whatsoever to just get a glance of what we are doing. It's a great, exciting, interesting profession that will evolve in the future even more.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Obviously, there's enough of us little old bald guys in this business, so we should diversify. Scott, the question for you is, how important is it to collaborate with peers outside of your own company? So, traditionally, competition is very stiff in organizations, but not so much in the security space. So I know we only have a couple minutes left, but if you could share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I prefer follically challenged, Tracy. So, but no, seriously, if someone was getting into a role like this, one of the very first things I always tell them, which I have, and I would tell them in the future, is to do exactly what you're asking about, which is reach out and find others that have already traveled down the path, right? And I have to give a plug to organizations like ISMA, the International Security Managers Association, and then also ASIS and others. They've created great networking platforms for this to occur. You absolutely have to do it. I mean, there are structural things to tie into right away. So if you're in the U.S., as an example, and you're tied in any way to critical infrastructure, there are security councils, or there are chemical sector coordinating councils, the one that I'm involved with, and those councils can all work together. So I found my colleague in the oil and natural gas sector, in the food and ag sector, energy, electricity subsector, and these are all sectors that have dependencies on each other. And it was amazing when COVID really started to take root, the amount of collaboration that occurred across these critical infrastructure sectors, and you create lifelong relationships. So whatever vector you have to travel to build these connections outside of your own sector. You know, reach out to, if you're in chemical or oil and gas, reach out to financial, reach out to retail. You're going to learn a great deal. It's absolutely critical.
Great. Well, it looks like we are about out of time. Lana, Julia, Scott, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and experience with us. Please stay in touch, and hopefully we will all be able to meet sometime in the near future in person. But thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Bye-bye. Bye.